We all know Fire Emblem to be a medieval fantasy series, surely. Knights, princesses, castles, swords, the whole book of tropes is present in every single entry. And yet, for some bizarre reason, the series cannot let go of its obsession with zombies, or whatever word they've decided to use instead of calling them that. I've always found this an incredibly interesting creative decision that Intelligent Systems has continued to make throughout the entire lifespan of the series, because the combination of medieval warfare and zombie-like enemies feels incredibly rare to me. It's two popular tropes in media culture for sure, but they're hardly ever put together. Yet, here we have Fire Emblem and its many zombie-like threats, and no one ever really seems to talk about it. Despite this literally being in more games than Manakets, for example, yet I think a lot more people will consider that a Fire Emblem trope. So I figured, let's have a look through the history of the series to see how exactly each game turns its medieval fantasy story into The Walking Dead. And while it would be decades before the entire story would revolve around what is effectively a zombie apocalypse, the Undead have been a part of the franchise since the literal second entry. Gaiden establishes them as one of the many monster types brought to life by the power of Duma, and while it as such is filled with zombie-like enemies, they aren't necessarily the main focus over, say, gargoyles or weird eye monsters. They are, however, literally the first enemy Celica faces on her journey, so they're not exactly hard to miss or recognize either, since this fight takes place in a graveyard of all things. And as has since become tradition, they're not referred to with the big Z word, with Gaiden's solution being either terrors, to describe the entire group of monsters summoned by Duma, or revenants, for the simple brainless foot soldiers that come closest to being literal zombies. What's interesting though is that the Revenant has become a bit of a recurring enemy in later games that would feature zombie-like enemies, and as such, the word Revenant could be seen as Fire Emblem's alternative to zombie. That said, it should be pointed out that in Japanese, these enemies are known as zombie, and take two guesses what that means. So while it appears as if the localizers have strictly been told not to use the word to refer to any enemy in the series, the same thing doesn't apply to Japan. Or Germany. Or Italy. Because there, the enemies were translated as zombie in their respective versions of Shadows of Valentia. And while that game has a lot more to say about its undead enemies than Gaiden did, we're gonna skip over that for now for reasons anyone who has played the DLC will know, and continue with some minor roles, but hey, those count too. Such as in Genealogy of the Holy War. As far as Fire Emblem games go, this is one of the least fantastical ones, and yet even Jugdral doesn't shy away from undead foes. The Dead Lords join Julius in the final battle of the game, although very little is explained about them. That is all left for Freysia, where it is explained that these Dead Lords are actually more like half zombies. They're at least not the reanimated corpses of an elite group of warriors like you may think. Instead, the essence, for lack of a better word, of a Dead Lord is put inside the body of a different person by the Lapter Church. We see this happening with Raedric, who was teleported away upon defeat to later return as a Dead Lord. Similarly, if you fail to recruit certain characters, they will become the bodies of the Dead Lords, a detail I've always really appreciated. But yeah, as such, they are zombies, since they are dead bodies brought back to life, but not in the way you may initially think at least. However, it is worth pointing out that the Dead Lords reappear in Awakening, now as Arisen, which definitely helps to make them feel more like traditional zombies, but more on Awakening later. First, we have to answer the question, are the Morphs from the Blazing Blade also zombies? They very much appear to be undead, and there are also several instances, especially near the end of the game, where we encounter more versions of characters we know are dead, like Brendan Reed, Ursula, Lloyd and Linus. As such, it is easy to assume that, yeah, the Morphs are another for the long list of undead enemies, which would then make the Blazing Blade the first game where zombies can be considered the main foe, but that actually isn't the case at all. A zombie is an undead corpse, and that's what the Revenants in Gaiden presumably are, and the Dead Lords of Jugdral as well. But Morphs are something different. They are human-like monsters, but they are entirely composed of quintessence, a sort of life energy that Nergal can control and use. Using quintessence, he can create either original morphs like Limstella and Kishuna, but he can also create them in the image of someone else, as long as he has access to their quintessence. That is how these fallen characters reappear as undead figures in the final chapter. They aren't their actual corpses reanimated, they're morphs, new beings, created from their past selves' life energy. So we can cross the Blazing Blade off the list as a game that may definitely feel as if it revolves entirely around undead enemies, but technically does not. And while I wouldn't go as far as to say the Sacred Stones revolves around zombies either, their presence in Magvel is simply undeniable. I've never really realized this before, but thematically, the Sacred Stones has basically the exact same story setup as Gaiden. A male and a female lord traverse their region to fight against mostly hordes of monsters that are brought into the world through the sheer dark energy of the main villain. And in Magvel's case, that villain is Mortis. According to legends, Magvel's resident monsters came to exist when the original heroes fought and defeated Mortis using the Sacred Stones, with the lingering dark energy emitting from his flesh and blood, forming the hordes of dark beings that now reside and live in the Darkling Woods. And among those monsters are once again the Revenant, returning from Gaiden as the main zombie replacement. According to Seth, Revenants are the weakest of the monsters of Magvel, but they are still to be considered stronger than an average man, which would I guess place them above the zombies as they are usually depicted in popular culture, brain dead and more of a minor threat individually. In fact, that is definitely something that really separates Fire Emblem zombies from other media. The whole mindless, slow-walking zombie type doesn't really exist here, with instead most undead enemies armed with all kinds of weapons and on occasion even capable of speech. That is however not a defense in the slightest for what the hell Orson is doing with his wife Monica. I'm gonna take a wild guess and assume that you know what I'm referring to, seeing as this is one of Fire Emblem's most well-known dark moments, but just to summarize in case you're not familiar, let's just say Orson has trouble saying goodbye to his dead wife and decides to keep her around. It is worth pointing out though, for our zombie analysis purposes, that Monica can still speak, even if it is only the word darling. It does show once again that the undead in Fire Emblem are more than just lifeless husks brought back to life. Something of the person that they used to be remains alive. This is later not seen however when we fight against the reanimated body of Morpha, Myr's adopted father, although he has at this point transformed into a necro-dragon Manakete, so that could possibly be the reason why he doesn't speak. Next up we have easily the most overlooked zombie implementation of the entire series, mostly because, well, it's never actually shown on screen. During the climax of Radiant Dawn, Ashura reanimates the corpses of fallen soldiers of the Disciples of Order and sends them in massive waves at our poor little heroes. We never actually get to see this though, or even fight them, as the only purpose this serves is to explain why you must decide which units to take into the final segment of the game. The units you decide to bench stay behind and fight off these undead soulless soldiers. It's a footnote in the story of Tellius, obviously, but it does mean this is another game that features undead forces as a plot device at a not so unimportant moment. But of course it pales in comparison with the next new game in the series, Fire Emblem Awakening. Had you not realized zombies were a bona fide Fire Emblem trope at this point, Awakening made very sure you noticed. The Risen are more than just world building, more than just a segment of a larger monster population. They are one of the main threats you face in the story and the only consistent one, compared to the human opponents who change throughout the story in arcs. However, despite their entire being feeling very inspired by zombies and zombie apocalypse stories, we can't just trust the book by its cover. After all, we've literally seen them falling out of portals in their introductory cutscene, not exactly the same as the classic hand reaches out of grave. So, what are the Risen really? Well, strangely enough, that question is not answered in Awakening itself, and instead confined to the aforementioned DLC of Shadows of Valentia. Here, Alma-Celica visit the Fabes Labyrinth, the birthplace of the Risen, and a location that appears in the series as early as Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Fabes is an ancient Archanean city that used to be the home of many sorcerers and other wizarding types. Among them was an alchemist known as Forneus, who, following the death of his wife, became obsessed with being able to resurrect the dead. His studies took a successful turn after he started looking into the Thanatophagus, a species of insect that he would use to create an invention known as the Death Mask. This device is the strange mask all Risen wear, and it powers them with dark energy that allows them to resurrect, despite being a lifeless corpse. Forneus' story goes deeper than that. He is also responsible for creating Grima, for example, but as far as our zombie analysis go, this is really all we have to know. Yes, the Risen are zombies. They are lifeless corpses of former humans brought back to life by use of the Death Mask, which Grima, who ended up controlling Forneus, uses all those centuries later to shroud the world in darkness. Seeing as there is powerful dark magic at play here, it's also a little more understandable why exactly the Risen show a decently high level of cognitive ability. They can use swords, run, understand orders, have a certain military rank, evidenced by the Risen Chief for example, and it's even stated that Walhart was able to lead a group of Risen for a while, which not only speaks to his abilities, but also tells us something about the Risen. Oh, and another interesting detail, the word Risen is canonically coined by officials of Elise's War Council, and as such, in Shadows of Valentia, which takes place centuries before these events, the Risen encountered here are not named as such, but instead referred to by what is essentially their original name, Death Masks. And since Crom and the like don't know about this origin by the time Awakening rolls around, that name is then no longer used. But of course, in between Awakening and Shadows of Valentia, we also have Fates. And since this game takes after Awakening in quite a lot of ways, of course there had to be some sort of undead enemy mechanic as well. However, this time it's far from as overt as the Risen were, and in true Fates fashion, the exact details aren't explained as much as you would like. What is for certain is that Anankos can bring back the dead, as we see him do with Ared and Sumeragi for example, but there is definitely a strong difference between the typical zombie and what we see here. This becomes especially clear in the cutscene in Ared Undone, where Ared shows full cognitive knowledge of who she is and who Azura is, as the two share a goodbye moment before she fades away. It gives off a vibe that's more reminiscent of a ghost or a spirit almost, rather than the idea that this is actually Ared's undead corpse. Again, how exactly this all works, we simply don't know. Fates never explains it, and there isn't even a name for whatever, for example, Ared is during the story. Valide probably comes closest, but even that doesn't feel entirely correct. So yeah, we have very little to go off as to decide whether this is another zombie situation or something more akin to the Morphs, but based on the little evidence we do have, I don't think considering this to be Fire Emblem's next group of zombies is entirely correct. Next up is Free Houses, which may be filled to the brim with monster encounters, but is actually very light on anything even resembling zombies. However, there is something resembling the Dead Lords of Jogdral, of course in the person of the 10 Elites. While the nitty-gritty details aren't known, it does appear likely that these qualify as zombies in a similar way as the Dead Lords do. We know for a fact the 10 Elites are long dead by the time Free Houses takes place, yet they ride again alongside Nemesis in the Golden Deer route. And, as Rhea speculates, this is the result of meddling of those who slither in the dark, as well as the presence of Sophie's blood inside Nemesis, confirming that this is not an illusion, new construct or anything else. This is the same body as was slain by Seros all those years ago. And as such, Nemesis and presumably the 10 Elites as well are reanimated corpses, i.e. zombies. Definitely not the same idea of zombies as we see in Awakening though, or as we would see next in Engage. I didn't think it was possible for Fire Emblem to give an even bigger role to zombies than Awakening did, but Engage set out to prove me wrong. From the first chapter to the last, our main enemy are the Corrupted, to the point human opponents are only sparingly used throughout the game and serve more of a supporting villainous role. How exactly Corrupted came to be is basically impossible to say, as it is never explained, but we do know they are undead monsters created from human corpses, which, hey, qualifies in my book. Aside from the fact that they are an even more prevalent opponent than the Risen, the Corrupted stand out in other ways as well. For example, they are the first zombie-like opponents in Sacred Stones that we actually see characters die and become a part of, in the form of Morion and later Lumera. They are unique Corrupted actually, a result of first Veil and later Sombron having the capability to create more detailed, unique Corrupted rather than the generic ones we see for the vast majority of the game. Whether this process requires the actual corpse is a little unclear however, which could hurt their status as true zombie. In Morion's case, we know for a fact that this is his corpse, but for Lumera, it's possible, but it feels rather unlikely. Another strange one is Hyacinth, who we seemingly watch get devoured by Sombron, but later reappears as a Corrupted. Now, it isn't impossible that his body was simply still intact and then resurrected, that cannot be ruled out, but both Lumera and Hyacinth do spread a little doubt over how exactly the Corrupted work. But kinda befitting of Engage as a whole, that is never exactly explained, and so we cannot know for certain. So, in essence, we have the same situation as with Fates, except with the likely scenario reversed. In Fates, we didn't know, but something like a ghost or at the very least something not requiring a corpse felt more logical, whereas with Engage, we also don't exactly know, but an actual corpse requiring zombie feels more appropriate. Anyway, that is every zombie-esque enemy in Fire Emblem history. I'm really curious though, how do you feel about this trope? Like I said, I feel like it's rarely discussed despite being super common, so please, share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.